The bucket crashed down. Ice water drenched her hair as she trembled, until a Marine's shadow stepped between her and the bullies. From that day, she learned courage. Guided by the Marine and his loyal K9, she rose to lead others against cruelty. Years later, in a courtroom glowing with truth, she stood beside the soldier, bringing justice to those who once destroyed her. Before we begin, share your thoughts and subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and faith that move the heart. The Florida sun burned hot and heavy above Clearwater, hanging low like molten copper over the vast blue stretch of the Gulf. The air shimmered with salt and humidity, and the wind carried the faint cry of gulls that circled lazily above the boardwalk. Beneath that relentless brightness, a small gray sedan pulled into the cracked driveway of a seaside apartment complex, its tires crunching over gravel bleached by years of sun. Inside the car sat Emily Carter, 16 years old, her pale face half hidden behind a curtain of dark brown hair. Her eyes, a muted green that once shone with youth, now seemed older than they should be. She was thin, her posture drawn inward as if to make herself smaller, to occupy less of the world. She gripped a sketchbook against her chest, like a shield. When her mother turned off the ignition, silence filled the air except for the ocean breathing somewhere beyond the dunes. "Home," her mother whispered softly, forcing the word to sound hopeful. Grace Carter stepped out first. She was in her early 40s, tall but slightly stooped, the kind of woman whose back carried too many invisible weights. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose knot that couldn't hide the streaks of gray spreading from her temples. Sunlight revealed the faint freckles across her fair skin and the exhaustion around her blue-gray eyes. Once, she had been graceful in the way nurses often are, quick, capable, and kind. But the past year had turned that grace into endurance. She stood now by the car door, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sea met the sky, as if she could measure hope in the color of the waves. "You can see the ocean from here," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emily didn't answer. She opened the door, the hinges groaning, and stepped into the warm air that clung to her skin like a damp blanket. The smell of salt water mixed with tar from the old asphalt road. The hum of cicadas filled the silence. Clearwater was supposed to be a new beginning, but the brightness of it hurt. Grace reached for the trunk and began unloading the boxes, so few of them that it hurt to count. One was labeled kitchen, another books, and the smallest, Daniel's tools. Emily froze when she saw that name, her father's, written in her mother's careful handwriting. The marker ink had smudged, but the letters still seemed to shout. Her father, Daniel Carter, had once been her hero. He was a mechanic, a man whose hands were always rough, whose skin was permanently stained with grease and sun. He had a crooked smile and a beard he never quite trimmed right. He wasn't the kind of man who read books or wore suits, but he could fix anything with an engine and loved his family with a fierce, unspoken devotion. Until that night. Until the screams, the police lights, and the courtroom that smelled like old wood and lies. Emily had stopped believing in heroes the day the judge sentenced him to 7 years for assaulting innocent students. The same boys who had cornered her, who had laughed when she begged them to stop. Her father had protected her, but the truth drowned in the tide of money and influence. The Carters were poor, and in the eyes of the world, poor meant guilty. Grace carried a box up the narrow stairs, her breath uneven. Emily followed, her sketchbook pressed to her chest. Their new apartment smelled of dust and sea salt. The walls were yellowed, The ceiling fan wobbled with every rotation, and somewhere in the plumbing, a faucet dripped rhythmically. Yet through the window, the view opened to a vast expanse of glittering water. "See?" Grace said again, her voice soft, hopeful. "The sea's right there. We'll be fine here." Emily nodded, but inside her chest, everything felt heavy. She dropped her backpack by the sofa and walked to the window. The sunlight reflected off the water so sharply it almost hurt to look at it. The sound of the waves was steady, constant, almost like breathing. That night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment creaked with unfamiliar noises, the wind scraping against the window frame, the distant laughter of people walking along the pier, the occasional bark of a dog. Grace slept in the next room, her breathing shallow. Emily sat by the window with her sketchbook, tracing lines in the half-dark. Her pencil moved softly, forming waves, seagulls, and the vague outline of a man standing against the horizon. She didn't know why she drew him. Maybe it was her father. Maybe it was the shadow of someone she wished had been there. The first day at Clearwater High was a blur of faces, lockers slamming, and the sticky scent of sunscreen mixed with floor polish. Emily kept her hood up, walking the halls as if wading through fog. Her new classmates glanced at her, then whispered. Some recognized her last name from old news articles still lingering online. Others simply followed the scent of weakness like sharks in shallow water. In the cafeteria, she chose a corner table near the exit, opening her sketchbook as if it could make her invisible. It almost worked until a girl with too much perfume and bright pink nails leaned over. "You're the girl from Crestview, right?" she said, voice dripping curiosity masked as kindness. "The one whose dad went to prison?" Emily didn't answer. Her pencil snapped between her fingers. The other girl giggled, a sound sharp enough to cut. By the time Emily returned home that afternoon, she felt hollow. Grace asked about school, and Emily lied. "It's fine," she said. "Just different." Grace smiled, relieved, not seeing the way Emily's hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water. That evening, Grace sat at the small kitchen table with bills spread around her. Her hands, still elegant from years of caring for patients, now shook when she wrote numbers. Working double shifts at Clearwater Medical was the only way to pay rent and send money to the lawyer still fighting Daniel's appeal. "Someday," she murmured, mostly to herself, "they'll know the truth." Emily didn't respond. She sat on the balcony, knees to her chest, watching the last light fade. The horizon glowed orange, and the sea caught fire for a brief, perfect moment before the darkness swallowed it whole. She imagined the laughter of those boys echoing again, the way they had looked at her, not as a person, but as something they could ruin for fun. She pressed her fingers to the sketchbook, tracing invisible lines, trying to trap the memories inside the paper so they couldn't reach her anymore. When the first star appeared, she whispered into the humid air, "I wish I could disappear." Down below, waves lapped at the shore, patient and endless. Clearwater was beautiful, yes, but beauty, Emily thought, could be cruel. Underneath its shimmering surface, everything she tried to forget was still there, waiting. And yet, somewhere far out on that glowing horizon, the wind carried a promise she couldn't hear yet, a promise that one day someone would see her, not as a ghost, but as a person who still deserved light. The sun over Clearwater burned with a merciless brightness, the kind that turned asphalt into mirrors and sent waves of heat shimmering across the school courtyard. The sound of cicadas was loud enough to drown out thought, and the air tasted faintly of salt, even this far from the shore. The banners hanging at the gate of Clearwater High rippled in the heavy wind. Courage in the classroom. Marine Corps Leadership Week. Students milled about, fanning themselves with notebooks, half curious and half indifferent to the arrival of the Marines. At the edge of the courtyard stood Sergeant Jack Turner, a man in his early 30s with the posture of someone who had spent half his life under orders. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw shadowed by stubble the color of sand. His skin was tanned deep from years of deployment under foreign suns, and a faint scar traced the right side of his chin, a souvenir from a mission he rarely spoke of. His eyes were a shade of gray-blue, steady, alert, the kind of eyes that measured everything and missed nothing. Years in combat zones had trained him to see the smallest tremor of fear, the flicker of defiance, the difference between strength and bravado. Beside him sat Ranger, his K-9 partner, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. The dog's ears twitched with every sound, but his posture remained calm, controlled. Ranger had been trained for search and rescue, bomb detection, and crowd control. But to Jack, he was more than that. He was the one constant presence through dust, blood, and silence. The Marine's hand rested unconsciously on the dog's head, fingers brushing over the fur like a grounding ritual. Principal Howard Wilkins, a stocky man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a sun-reddened neck, greeted Jack with a handshake that tried to feel authoritative. "Sergeant Turner, thank you for doing this. The kids could use some discipline. Clearwater's got a bit too much summer and not enough sense." He chuckled awkwardly. Jack gave a polite nod. "We'll do our best, sir. The program's about building confidence, not breaking it." By noon, the gym was sweltering. Students gathered in uneven rows while Jack demonstrated basic drills: balance, teamwork, communication. Ranger moved among them with silent grace, responding to hand signals and brief commands, drawing gasps of admiration from the more curious onlookers. Emily Carter was not one of them. She stood at the very back, her hair tied messily, sketchbook clutched close. The noise, the heat, the smell of sweat, it all pressed down on her until her breathing felt shallow. She hated the stares, the way people nudged each other and whispered when her name was mentioned. "That's her," they said, the words sharp enough to cut. "The one from Crestview." Jack noticed her almost immediately. While the others laughed and shouted, she stood still, like a ghost trapped in daylight. There was something in her stillness that wasn't shyness. It was survival. He had seen that same look before on civilians in war zones, people who had learned that invisibility was safer than hope. After the session, as the students scattered, Jack approached her. His boots made a steady rhythm against the gym floor. Ranger followed, tail low but wagging slightly. "You draw," he said simply, nodding at the sketchbook she was hugging. His voice was calm, low, the kind that carried quiet authority but no threat. Emily hesitated. "Sometimes." Ranger sniffed the air, then stepped closer, his nose gently brushing her hand. She froze, eyes widening. The dog's gaze was warm, steady, non-judgmental. She tentatively reached out and touched his fur. "He's calm." "Usually," Jack said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "He knows good people." That was the first time Emily smiled since she'd arrived in Clearwater. A small, fragile thing that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The next day, Jack held an outdoor training session by the beach. The students ran obstacle courses set up on the sand, laughing and complaining in equal measure. Ranger darted through tunnels, retrieved mock equipment, and barked on command. The sky was a glaring blue, and the air shimmered with heat. Emily sat apart, sketching quietly under the shade of a palm tree, capturing the shape of waves and the fluid lines of Ranger in motion. It was then that trouble found her. 3 boys, local golden kids with tan skin, expensive sneakers, and the careless arrogance that comes from never facing consequences, walked toward her. Their leader, Chad Walters, had the easy smile of someone used to being admired. His father owned a marina and half the beachfront businesses in town. Chad's blonde hair was sun-bleached, his jaw square, and his eyes cold, the kind of blue that didn't hold warmth. "Hey, art girl," he called out. "You too good to join us? Or are you just drawing your imaginary friends again?" His 2 friends laughed. Emily ignored them, head down, pencil moving faster. Chad kicked at the sand near her feet. "Come on, don't be rude. We're just trying to make conversation." She finally looked up, voice trembling. "Please, leave me alone." The boys smirked. Chad snatched the sketchbook from her hands. "What's this? Portraits? Let's see if you drew me handsome." He flipped through the pages. The drawings were stunning, detailed studies of the sea, the texture of waves, and one of Ranger mid-run. He laughed cruelly. "Cute. You like dogs more than people, huh?" He tossed the book toward the water, where it landed on wet sand. The others howled with laughter. From across the beach, Ranger's head snapped up. The dog's ears stiffened, muscles tensing like a coiled spring. Jack followed his gaze and immediately saw the scene unfolding, his jaw clenched. By the time he reached them, Emily's sketchbook was half-soaked, the ink bleeding into abstract shapes. The boys froze when Jack stepped into their circle, his shadow cutting through the glare. "That's enough," he said quietly. There was no anger in his tone, but something colder, discipline honed by years of command. "Pick up the book," Chad sneered, masking fear with defiance. "We were just playing, man." Jack's gaze hardened. "Then play somewhere else." One of the boys bent down, retrieved the sketchbook, and handed it to Emily. She took it silently, eyes down. The pages were ruined, but she didn't cry. Jack shrugged off his marine jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The scent of sea and fabric softener filled her lungs, grounding her. Ranger stood in front of her, growling low, not threatening but protective. The boys backed away. Chad muttered something under his breath, but his voice lacked conviction. They left, kicking sand in their retreat. Emily stared at the water, her reflection distorted by the ripples. For the first time, someone had stepped between her and the world. Jack stood beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice came out small. "Why did you help me?" He looked out at the sea, its surface gleaming like glass under the dying sun. "Because no one else did." They stood there for a long moment, listening to the waves. The heat had softened, and the air carried the faint smell of salt and rain. Ranger pressed his head gently against Emily's leg, and she reached down to stroke his fur. The trembling in her hands eased. For the first time in months, Emily Carter felt something other than fear. It was fragile and unfamiliar, but it was hope. And it wore the uniform of a Marine and the soft eyes of a loyal dog. The Florida sun had softened by late August, and Clearwater smelled of salt and slow forgiveness. The sea was calmer now, its waves no longer roaring but whispering secrets to those who lingered long enough to listen. For Emily Carter, the town that had once felt like exile now began to resemble something else. Possibility. Each morning she woke before sunrise, walked along the beach with her sketchbook, and met Sergeant Jack Turner and Ranger for their daily drills. The sand was cool beneath her bare feet, the sky a wash of soft pink and gray. Jack moved with the precision of a man whose body remembered discipline like a heartbeat. His broad shoulders caught the morning light. His uniform rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms traced with old scars and faint sunburn. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was quiet and genuine, like sunlight through clouds. Ranger, the German shepherd, padded beside him, muscular, confident, his coat gleaming sable and bronze. He was 5 years old, but carried himself like a veteran twice that age. His eyes, amber and steady, had seen explosions, fear, and death, yet when he looked at Emily, there was only calm understanding. Jack often said the dog was better at reading people than he ever was. The sessions started small. Jack taught Emily simple posture, how to stand straight without folding inward, how to walk with purpose. The world reads body language before it ever listens, he said. He made her speak commands to Ranger, sit, stay, heel, until her voice carried strength instead of apology. At first, she stammered, afraid even of her own sound, but Ranger responded faithfully each time, tail flicking, waiting for her next cue. Over the weeks, her fear began to peel away, layer by layer. Jack noticed the changes, her voice steadying, her eyes meeting his longer. Sometimes, when they trained near the dunes, he would toss her small pieces of advice disguised as orders. "Look up when you talk," he'd say. "You can't see opportunity if you're watching the ground." Other times, he said nothing at all, just watched her draw in the sand with her pencil, letting silence teach what words could not. One afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered far beyond the pier, Jack brought her to an abandoned lifeguard tower. "You know why people respect Marines?" he asked, leaning against the railing. "It's not the uniform. It's because we stand up even when it costs us." Emily listened, the wind tugging at her hair. "You think I can do that?" she asked quietly. Jack met her gaze. "You already are." By early fall, whispers spread through Clearwater High. The quiet girl who once hid behind sketchbooks was different now. She walked through the halls upright, her steps measured, her expression calm. The same kids who used to whisper cruel jokes now fell silent when she passed. Not because she scared them, but because she carried something they didn't understand: composure. It was during lunch one afternoon when Emily found the courage to speak to others who had once suffered in silence. She approached Lena Martinez, a small Latina girl with a shy smile and large glasses, often teased for her accent. Beside her sat Elliot Reed, tall and awkward, with curly red hair and freckles, a target of bullies for being too gentle. Emily's voice was soft but steady. "What if we had a group? Not to complain, but to protect each other, to make sure no one goes through what we did." Lena blinked, uncertain. "Like a club?" "More like a promise," Emily said. "A promise to be brave together." That afternoon, in the art room that smelled faintly of turpentine and chalk, Voices of Courage was born. The group began with just 4 students: Emily, Lena, Elliot, and another boy named Ben Carter, no relation to Emily. A quiet kid with dark skin and a chipped tooth who rarely smiled. Under the hum of ceiling fans, they talked about fear, injustice, and standing up. Emily guided them, not like a leader commanding troops, but like someone who had walked through the fire and found water on the other side. Jack noticed the change in her. She came to training less withdrawn, talking about the meetings with a spark in her eyes. "You're building something real," he said one evening as they packed up the training gear. "What you're doing, giving others a voice, it's the kind of fight that lasts." She smiled at him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You sound proud." "I am," Jack replied simply. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures but through quiet moments. Shared coffee on the boardwalk, long silences watching the horizon, laughter over Ranger's obsession with chasing waves. There was a warmth between them neither dared to name, built from mutual respect and something softer, unspoken. But as all seasons do, summer began to fade. Orders arrived for Jack to return to his unit. The news came on a Sunday afternoon. He was sitting at a cafe near the harbor, sipping black coffee when his phone vibrated. The message was short. Deployment confirmed. Report within 72 hours. When he told Emily, they were standing by the water's edge, Ranger's leash looped loosely around Jack's wrist. Emily's eyes widened, and for a long moment she said nothing. The breeze carried her hair across her face. "So soon," she whispered. Jack nodded. "It's part of the job." Her voice broke slightly. "Will you come back?" Jack's jaw tightened. He looked at the sea, the same sea that had once terrified her, now calm, silver under the setting sun. "When the sea calms," he said softly, "I'll find my way back." Ranger nudged her leg gently, as if sensing her sorrow. Emily knelt, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. His fur was warm, steady, alive. "You'll keep him safe, right?" she murmured. Ranger let out a low rumble that sounded almost like a promise. Jack reached out, brushing the back of his hand against Emily's shoulder, a gesture halfway between comfort and farewell. "Keep teaching those kids. Keep your voice steady. That's how we win." The next morning, Clearwater High buzzed with the sound of students arriving for the new term. Emily stood by the front gate, watching as cars pulled up and laughter filled the air. Her sketchbook was under her arm, its pages now filled with drawings of waves, of Ranger, of strength reborn. She turned toward the ocean, where a military truck was driving away in the distance, its figure growing smaller until it was nothing more than a shadow swallowed by light. She whispered into the warm breeze, "Hold fast, Jack Turner." The wind carried the words out to sea. Somewhere far ahead, a Marine and his loyal dog moved toward another battlefield. But this time, they left behind something just as enduring, a voice that would never again stay silent. The air in Boston carried a different kind of weight, a mix of sea wind, ambition, and the faint metallic scent of old brick buildings baking under the summer sun. The courtyard of Harvard Law School was alive with students walking briskly, arms full of casebooks, voices echoing through the ancient arches. Amid them walked Emily Carter, now 18, her dark brown hair tied neatly into a low ponytail, her once fragile frame replaced by the quiet posture of someone who had learned to endure storms. Her eyes were sharper now, green with a golden hue that reflected both curiosity and caution. Though her classmates saw only another promising student, Emily carried something far heavier than the weight of legal theory. She carried a mission. Her dorm room overlooked the Charles River, and on her desk lay a box wrapped in brown paper, the only thing she had brought from Clearwater. Inside were her father's old court documents, brittle with time. Every night after classes, when the laughter from the common hall faded, she unfolded the yellowed pages, reading line by line. The testimonies were biased, the evidence inconsistent, the signatures from men who never looked her father in the eye. Daniel Carter had been sentenced not for his actions, but for being poor, loud, and unwilling to kneel. Emily's roommate, Rachel Nguyen, often watched her with quiet concern. Rachel was 20, Vietnamese American, short with jet black hair cut into a clean bob, always smelling faintly of jasmine tea. She was bright, practical, and kind-hearted, one of those people who found calm in chaos. "You're chasing ghosts again," Rachel said one night, closing her laptop and stretching. "Maybe it's time to let it go." Emily didn't look up from the papers. "It's not ghosts I'm chasing. It's the truth." Rachel sighed softly. "Then promise me you won't drown in it." Days turned into weeks. Emily's professors quickly recognized her intensity. Professor Alan West, a tall man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, taught criminal justice with a reputation for brutal honesty. He noticed Emily's tenacity during a seminar on wrongful convictions. "Miss Carter," he said one afternoon, leaning on the podium, "you argue like someone with something to lose." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I do." West studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Good. The law needs believers. Cynics are useless in court." Outside the classroom, Emily's world was smaller. She avoided parties, rarely joined study groups. Every spare hour was spent piecing together her father's case, tracing the tangled lines of corruption that had buried the truth. Her search led her back to Clearwater, through online archives and digital trails. There she discovered something new. One of the signatories in her father's sentencing had been William Walters, a board member of Crestview Academy and the father of Chad. Walters, the same boy who had ruined her life. The revelation made her hands tremble. She remembered Chad's mocking smile, the ice water dripping from her hair, the sound of her father's voice shouting her name before the police dragged him away. The years between then and now disappeared. She opened her notebook and began to write. Case reopening strategy. Key suspects. Walter's family, Crestview Board, former district attorney. A few months later, during a late autumn afternoon, a familiar name appeared in her inbox. Jack Turner. The message was short. Back stateside. In Boston for debrief. Heard you made it to Harvard. Proud of you, kid. She read it twice, her pulse quickening. The memory of his voice, calm and certain, came rushing back. The scent of sea salt. The warmth of Ranger's fur under her hand. She typed back before she could think. There's something I need your help with. They met the next evening at a quiet cafe near Beacon Hill. Jack looked older, 34 now, with deeper lines around his eyes and a streak of silver cutting through his short brown hair. The years had not softened him. If anything, they had carved him into something steadier. He wore a simple dark jacket, the posture of a man who could never truly relax, and when he smiled, it was tinged with weariness. Ranger was with him, sitting by his side, tail flicking lazily. His muzzle had begun to gray, but his eyes were still alert. When Emily knelt to greet him, Ranger leaned his head against her hand, letting out a soft whine of recognition. He remembers you, Jack said, a smile flickering across his face. He doesn't forget family. Emily looked up at him, her throat tightening. You came back. Promised I would, he said simply. What's going on? Over steaming mugs of coffee, Emily told him everything. Her father's case, the corrupt officials, the Walters family. Jack listened silently, his jaw set. When she finished, he leaned back, crossing his arms. You're walking into dangerous ground, he said. Men like Walters don't just hide secrets, they bury them. I've been buried before, Emily replied. I know how to dig. Jack exhaled, half in admiration, half in worry. You've changed. I had to. And so they began again, not as soldier and girl, but as equals in pursuit of justice. Ranger became their silent companion, his senses sharper than any tool. They revisited Clearwater under the guise of research, meeting old faces who remembered too much or pretended not to. Sheriff Miles Donovan, once a young deputy at the time of her father's arrest, now wore the weary expression of a man haunted by compromise. He was in his late 40s, thick-set with thinning hair and a mustache turning gray. When Emily confronted him with the files, his hands trembled. "You think I didn't try," he muttered. "Walters owned half the town. If I'd spoken up, I'd have lost everything." "Then maybe you can help fix it now," Emily said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Come by tomorrow. I'll see what I can find." The next day, Donovan handed her an old USB drive. "Internal emails," he said, eyes darting nervously. "Between Walters and the district attorney's office. Don't tell anyone where you got them." Back in Boston, Emily and Jack spent nights combing through the data. The evidence was damning. Payments, falsified witness statements, legal tampering. Emily's heart raced as she realized what it meant. Not just redemption for her father, but the exposure of an entire network of corruption. Jack leaned over her shoulder, his voice low. "This could reopen everything." "It will," she said, "and this time, they'll have to listen." As dawn broke through the window, coloring the walls in pale gold, Emily looked at the man beside her, the soldier who had once stood between her and cruelty. Now he stood beside her again, not to protect her, but to fight with her. Ranger slept at their feet, dreaming softly. The law, she realized, wasn't just about rules. It was about courage. The same courage he had taught her years ago on the sand. The courthouse in Tampa, Florida, stood like a monument of glass and stone under the golden blaze of midsummer. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, slicing across the polished floor and settling on the faces of those who had come to witness the final reckoning. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was thick with tension and the quiet hum of whispers. At the front sat Emily Carter, now 20, in a crisp white suit that reflected the light like armor. Her posture was straight, composed, her green eyes steady beneath the calm mask she had worn since dawn. But beneath that surface, her heart thudded with the echo of every year she had waited for this moment. Across the aisle, William Walters, silver-haired and smug, sat beside his defense attorney. His tailored navy suit was immaculate, his cufflinks gleaming like false promises. His son, Chad Walters, now 21, sat behind him, thinner than before, arrogance drained and replaced by unease. His once confident jaw trembled slightly, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his tie. Behind them were members of the former school board, all polished faces hiding decades of rot. Jack Turner sat a few rows behind Emily, wearing a dark formal jacket that couldn't quite disguise the Marine's bearing. Straight-backed, vigilant, unflinching. Time and service had deepened the creases near his eyes, but his calm was unbreakable. Beside him lay Ranger, now gray around the muzzle, his breathing slower but steady. The old German shepherd lay with his head between his paws, his brown eyes fixed on Emily as if understanding every heartbeat in the room. The prosecutor, Maria Santos, rose from the table. She was a woman in her early 40s, with mahogany skin, sharp eyes, and a voice that carried quiet authority. A veteran of human rights cases, she was known for her composure and precision. "Your Honor," she began, turning toward Judge Rebecca Hale, a dignified woman in her 60s with snow-white hair pinned neatly back. "Today we bring forward the truth buried under years of deceit. We present not just evidence, but the story of a young girl silenced by privilege and a father imprisoned for his love and courage. She gestured toward Emily. "Miss Carter, please take the stand." Emily stood. The room seemed to fade into silence as she walked toward the witness box. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor, a sound that echoed through the chamber like the steady beat of courage. She took the oath, her voice clear and unwavering. "Miss Carter," Maria began gently, "can you tell the court what happened 8 years ago?" Emily inhaled, her fingers curling slightly around the wooden edge of the stand. "I was 16, she said. "A new student at Crestview Academy, a group of students, led by Chad Walters, humiliated me in front of everyone." Her eyes flicked briefly toward him. He couldn't meet her gaze. "They poured ice water over me. They laughed. When my father found out, he tried to protect me. But the school, the police, everyone said he was the aggressor. He was arrested for assault. He went to prison because we were poor and they were powerful." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Emily's voice grew steadier. "My father died believing he was a criminal, but he wasn't. He was just a father." Maria nodded. "Thank you. Please remain seated while we present the evidence." The screen behind her flickered to life. First came the old files, then the hidden emails from Sheriff Donovan's flash drive. Each message appeared like a blade cutting through the web of lies. "Mr. Walters," Maria said, pacing slowly, "you authorized payments to the district attorney to suppress the case, didn't you? You bribed officials to bury the truth." William's lawyer objected, but Maria's tone never wavered. "The financial records show deposits to a private account tied to the Walters Foundation, transferred directly to the DA's office. I believe the jury can decide whether that looks like coincidence or corruption." Then came the video, a shaky recording taken years ago by one of Chad's friends, finally recovered and authenticated. On screen, 16-year-old Emily sat on the bleachers, drenched, trembling, surrounded by laughter. Her father's voice could be faintly heard shouting her name before chaos broke out. The courtroom fell silent as the clip ended. Emily's hands trembled slightly, and Jack's jaw clenched so hard the muscles in his neck tightened. Ranger's ears perked, as if sensing the shift in emotion. When Chad was called to testify, he looked pale under the fluorescent lights. "I was young," he said, voice cracking. "It was supposed to be a prank. I didn't know it'd go that far." Maria's gaze was sharp. "And when your father covered it up?" Chad hesitated, eyes flicking toward William. He said it was better for everyone if we forgot." That single sentence shattered the defense's last wall. William's composure broke for the first time, his lips tightening in fury. The judge's gavel struck once. "Order in the court." By the time closing statements arrived, the truth was undeniable. Maria's voice carried the gravity of every injustice undone. "Justice," she said, "is not a luxury for the powerful. It belongs to the brave who refuse to be silent." When the jury filed out, Emily sat motionless. Her hands rested on the table, palms open. Jack reached forward from his seat behind her, his calloused hand covering hers. She didn't look back, but she felt the quiet strength in his touch. An hour later, the jurors returned. The forewoman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and perjury." The room erupted. Emily didn't move at first. It was as if her mind couldn't catch up to the words. Then tears welled in her eyes, and she turned. Jack was already standing, his hand reaching for hers. "You did it," he whispered, voice rough. She smiled through tears. "No," she said softly. We did. Outside, the sky broke open with summer rain, warm and cleansing. Ranger barked once, a deep, echoing sound of relief, and the entire courthouse seemed to exhale. Months later, Clearwater's shoreline glowed beneath a tangerine sunset. A small arch of white roses stood near the waves, and the scent of salt mingled with the laughter of a few close friends. Emily wore a simple ivory dress, her hair flowing loose in the sea breeze. Jack stood waiting at the altar, wearing his marine dress uniform, medals gleaming faintly in the golden light. Between them sat Ranger, now slower, grayer, but proud, a white ribbon tied gently around his neck. As the officiant spoke, Emily's gaze met Jack's. "For justice," she began, her voice trembling. "For love and for peace." Jack smiled, finishing softly. "Hold fast, forever." When they kissed, the ocean roared, not in anger, but in applause. And on that shore where pain had once begun, it ended, in light, forgiveness, and the endless rhythm of the sea. When the snow finally melted on Cascade Ridge, it wasn't just the mountain that thawed. It was two hearts learning to trust again. Jack Turner had lost faith in miracles long ago, somewhere between war and regret. Yet in that cabin, with Sophie's laughter echoing against the pine walls and valor curled at their feet, he realized something simple and divine. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a promise kept, a life saved, a stranger who becomes family. Maybe that's how God works, not through grand gestures, but through the hands of those who refuse to give up on love, even when the world grows cold. Every act of courage, every kindness shown, is proof that heaven still breathes among us. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember, no storm lasts forever. Somewhere out there, light is breaking through for you too. And if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment below to tell us how you've seen God's grace in your own life. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May the Lord bless you and your family. May He watch over you, guide your steps, and remind you that even in the coldest winter, His love is the warmth that never fades.